Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop. It's so nice to see so many people here. So my name is Nairy Abdelshafy. I'm an Egyptian educator and oral historian. Um, I think my introduction to oral history started when I was an undergrad, possibly in 2007. I did some volunteer work in Jordan with Palestinian refugee kids. We were doing some self-expression through arts workshops. And I think I was maybe 19 at the time. And just by, as we were working with the kids, we always met their parents and they were always telling us stories about their movement and how they made it to Jordan. And my friend kept telling me, you should write this down. We think this is really important, but we didn't know what we were doing, right? So we would just talk to people, write down their stories. And then when we went back home, came back to Cairo, we were working on our graduation project, and we just realized that this is a research methodology called oral history. So I think that's how we got into oral history. Um, but yeah, I see more people coming in, so I think I might wait a little bit to do more of the introductions. But maybe for now, if you can type in the chat and just let us know where you're joining us from, and maybe one thing you'd like us to know about you for today, that you think would be useful or interesting. I'll share my screen. Well, we have a very diverse group today. So you have a lot of people from the US, from Costa Rica, I see, Puerto Rico, Nigeria. Oh, someone from Egypt. Hi. Oh, and someone's joining with their mother. Wonderful. Very, very happy to meet you all. So I'll say briefly what I started saying at the beginning, that my name is Nairi. I'm an educator and oral historian. I got into oral history because I was working with, I was volunteering with some Palestinian refugee kids in Jordan back when I was an undergrad. And we were meeting their parents and hearing their stories. And at the time, we didn't really know about oral history, but we were very curious about documenting their stories because we thought these stories were really important. And then when we came back, we were supposed to work on our graduation project. And our professor, I think we were studying political sociology, was telling us about that this like methodology of sitting with people and recording their stories is called oral history, though she hadn't practiced it herself at the time, but she encouraged us to work with oral histories. And so my first like delve into the oral history world was trying to document stories from Palestinian refugees here in Egypt. And that was back in, God, I think 2008 was before I graduated. And then I think since then, for maybe 10 or 15 years, I've done oral history work in completely different forms and directions and for different purposes. And then after a while, I got into the master's program at Columbia and did my oral history master's degree, which was wonderful because I think doing oral history uh, just by reading manuals and like trying to teach it to ourselves was quite difficult and challenging. And so at the master's program, we were kind of given a good framework for how we work, and it kind of made sense and gave us some answers or options for how we could do deeper oral history work. Um, and I think another part of like why I got into oral history was also, I think I come from a family that tells a lot of stories. about different family members and stories that we get to inherit over generations. And I think the first time when I heard about oral history as a methodology, I kept thinking that what my dad was telling me was a bit of like oral history. And I was like, oh, I should go record like all these stories that he's telling me. And so I think there was definitely like a personal investment and interest in oral history as a process. I don't want to, I can keep talking about myself for a long time, so I'll be very aware not to take so much of the time speaking about myself, but I wanted you to know where I'm coming from. And today I have Solby with me as well. Solby, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Thank you, Nairy. Hi, everyone. My name is Solby Lim. I'm the Public Programming Fellow at OHMA, and I also just graduated from the program in February, and I'll be helping run the Zoom logistics for today's workshop. So just to make sure that the audio for the meeting runs smoothly, please make sure the mic stays off when you don't speak, and then if you want to speak or ask questions, just feel free to unmute. And if you have any technical issues or related questions, please also feel free to message me in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Solby. And welcome everyone. I see like I was just looking quickly at the chat and there are people from all over. I think we have people from Latin America, there's Canada. I saw there are some people from Egypt as well. So welcome everyone. So for today, yeah. So today's workshop would more or less cover three main themes. So we'll talk primarily about family memories, obviously, and then we'll talk also about archives in general and what it is to have a formal archive and an informal archive. When I say informal archive, I also mean like alternative forms of archiving. And we'll talk about this a bit more. And then the third theme is about archiving family collections. So basically, and like what I tried to call in the workshop title, capturing family memories, but how to also archive it. And so we'll also have a break, I think, after the first maybe hour and a half. And we'll have hopefully some breakout rooms towards the very end of the workshop where you can share a little bit about your own family memories and if you have any objects that you'd like to talk about and discuss. And we'll have the last half hour will be completely open for Q&A. And all throughout the process, if you have any questions, please type them down in the chat, and Solby was going to collect. If there's something very pressing that you need to share or talk about, please just like use the raise hand function and just we'll listen to you right away. Okay. So talking about family memories, first of all, when we talk about family memories, there are two words. I like to start with understanding the concepts and making sure that we're on board. So the word family is a bit complex, and I think people have very different descriptions and understandings of the word family. But in this workshop, or like for the purpose of today's workshop, we'll be talking about it in a very simple term. So it could be like the immediate family or over different generations, or it could also be extended family if you feel that you would want to include that. So that's okay. And also memories. So the field for memory studies is quite large and quite complex as well. But again, today we're just looking at it from a very simple perspective. So just memories that remind us of our family. And these could be tangible or intangible. So when we talk about tangible memories, obviously these are memories that we can touch or we can sense, and we usually call them memory objects. And so there are any objects that we can think of that either remind us of a memory or preserve a memory. And I say or because an object can remind you of a memory by basically any object that you have, when you look at it, it reminds you of something. But then also an object can preserve a memory that you don't know or don't remember, which happens sometimes with old photographs that you find. So it's not a memory that you yourself remember, but it's something that you know kind of existed and was there. Can you guys type in the chat what you think are types of like memory objects? Maps? recipes, clothes, letters. Clothes, we could also include jewelry, photos, furniture, prayer books in native languages, awards, medals, photos, perfume. Perfume is quite interesting. Yeah. Keys, gloves, voice recordings, instruments, blankets, books. Nice. Yeah, perfect. Toys, embroidery. Whoa, artificial limbs. That's interesting. That has to have a very interesting story. Diaries. Wonderful. Perfect. Homework. Okay, thank you very much. That's excellent. Calendar as well, ticket stubs. Yeah, perfect. And then, so when we talk about memories, we think on the one hand, there are the tangible ones, and then on the other hand, there are the intangible ones. And so they're the ones that obviously that we can't touch physically, but kind of sense. So things that have a certain smell or a taste that reminds us of something or a special memory. And so for me, I thought I was gonna share a little bit about my own like interest into family memories and like capturing family memories in general. And these pictures I have, which I think parts of them were in the announcement for the workshop as well, are pictures. This man at the bottom, like with the hat, and on the right, in the right picture as well, is my dad's uncle, and he's my grandmother's brother. And I grew up with stories about him, and so the story I remember that I was told was, so he grew up from, I think he was a middle-class family in Alexandria, but he was very passionate about films, filmmaking, and cinema. And he used to watch movies whenever he could. So he would go to movie theaters as a kid all the time. And then I think as a teenager, he started compiling spare parts of cameras, old cameras, and he built a camera put it together. And he always said he wanted to like be in the filmmaking business. Uh, I think these are stories that I heard from my dad partly, but also from my grandmother. Um, and then at some point, and this part is kind of blurry, so I never like really got the information, but he at some point was able to raise some money and buy an old cinema, I think that was run down, and he renovated it and sold it and made a lot of money, and then bought another movie theater, did the same, and then bought another one. And then at some point, he started owning movie theaters, and he opened up a distribution company. And then I don't know any of the details, but he ended up owning, I think, maybe 10 to 15 movie theaters between Cairo and Alexandria, and that was like in the 40s. And that was quite, it's a big thing. And then I think Egypt was a kingdom at the time. And then during the revolution in the 50s, when we became a republic, we had some nationalization laws. And so the government, most of his cinemas became government owned because of that. And so some of the cinemas still exist. And I think that's how I heard about the stories, because we'd be walking in Alexandria and my dad would be like, oh, this used to be my uncle's cinema, or this used to be his office, and things like that. And I think I like believed them blindly growing up, because I mean, that's what you do, right? When you listen to family stories. And then at some point, well, my grandmother passed away, and then my dad passed away, and I became much older, and I was very interested in knowing more about him. And so I started researching, and I couldn't find anything about him online, which was quite disturbing, because if he had done all that, there has to be something about him. But for years, I kept looking, and I never found any information. And then I think these pictures I got from my grandmother's house, and this receipt book at the back says it reads something like the cinematographic companies with his name under his name. And I think that there was a point when I started thinking maybe they made all these like stories up, but until I saw that receipt book, because I had this name of the company. I was like, okay, he existed. There was a company. There was something that has to do with filmmaking. And I think this has been a project that stayed with me for a few years. And like every time I meet someone, I would randomly tell them about the story and say like, oh, I wish I could know more about him. I had a friend that was like another random idea, but I had a friend who grew up in New Zealand, and I was telling him about this, and he was researching my uncle's name, my dad's uncle's name, and he found a ticket stub from one of his cinemas at the Auckland War Memorial Museum, I think, the online museum, and it had his name on it, and I think it was like the soldiers from the World War kind of took it back. So it was like the second layer of me believing that he existed if there was a ticket stub with his name on it, right? But anyways, I'm telling you all of this story because I think this has been this is going to be also my lifelong project. And because I don't have a lot of information about him, but I do have a lot of pictures. This is his wife as well, the one in the lady in the picture, the pretty lady. And aside from the small receipt book that I found, there's this other book at the back that's like a payroll book. And it says that it's for people working in the cinemas, but it doesn't say the name of the cinemas. It just says cinema, and then you fill in the name because obviously you owned a lot of cinemas. But yeah, so anyways, when I started to really try to gather these stories and make some sort of an understanding of his life, I had to resort to oral history because I really couldn't find any information. I think after a few years, the Library of Alexandria on their website had some sort of an inventory of cinemas in Alexandria with names of owners of cinemas and when it was founded. And for some of those, I found his name. So that was really helpful. But I went back and asked my mom. I interviewed my aunt, my dad's friends, anyone who grew up with these stories just like me, but also possibly might have met him, just to try and understand all these stories. But also one question that I was asking myself, but also being asked by other people was why are you so interested in gathering these kind of information? And I think that was the starting point of me realizing how important for me it is to archive family memories, because I feel like it's so strange that this person has existed, has done so much. And to be honest, even if he hadn't done so much, I would be interested. But you know what I mean, right? Someone existed, did all that, and then kind of disappeared, and no one knows anything about them. And the only thing that's really keeping the memory alive is us talking about him. And so over the years, I've developed a few projects inspired by him. And this was in a visual anthropology class that I took, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And so I started mapping, this is a map of Alexandria, and I started using the information from the Library of Alexandria website about the different cinemas owned by him. I went to the different locations and tried to take pictures and see if the cinema still existed or not, and do some sort of a visual map. This is not the final one, but I couldn't find a nice picture for the final product. So for some reason, I had lots of pictures of it in process, but it's basically looked like that. So I was trying to put flags as to the different locations and to try to see where the cinemas are now. Some still exist, some are demolished. One of the cinemas still exists as a building, but is a cheese factory right now, but it still has the name of the cinema on the front. And then a few years after that, I started developing it as an oral history project. And I called it, his name is Ilyas George Lutfi, that's his name, but they called him Ili. And so I said, it's a lens on the life and works of Ili and filmmaking in Alexandria. And so I was thinking that I don't want it to be his life story only, but also I think it portrays a lot of the filmmaking industry in Alexandria at the time, in the 40s and 50s especially. So it's a part of a bigger project where I'm trying to, first of all, understand what he did, where he was, whatever information I can find, but from his own story, I'm trying to have a bigger lens on how filmmaking was like the scene in Alexandria at the time and cinematography in general. And so for my methodology, I'm using oral history, I'm using a lot of personal collections and archival material, a lot of photos, documents, whatever I can find. And in the form of it, I want it to be a documentary. And so I have a few like trailers, very short trailers for how I would want it to look like. But yeah, basically it's all depending on our memories and stories that I've got from family members. And so I remember when I was like writing up the idea, I thought there are a lot of ethical considerations that have to do with how memory plays such a big role in this whole process. And so it could easily be contested. And there are a lot of questions around it because, as most of you probably know, memory isn't very linear and it's very interesting how people remember things differently, even ourselves, like memories that we've experienced, let alone memories that we're trying to gather about someone who we don't know. But yeah, but this is my long-term project that I'm working on. I'll show you one picture of, this is one of the very old cinemas that he owned in Alexandria that also included, most of the cinemas apparently at the time had a theater. So they also held concerts and different things. And on the right, you can see how it looks now. So I can't go inside, which I'm very curious to do, but like the space itself is still there, but it's mostly in ruins. Okay, so what I'm trying to do now, just for everyone to be aligned, is just to show you different forms of how, personally, was the first one just for me, how I was trying to capture these family memories through different forms. But also there is this short film, I think it's around 8 minutes, that Timur has done. Mohammed Timur is an Egyptian film producer and director. And he made this short film, it's called From the Remains of the Dead, trying to document his grandmother's mostly family home, but also he has a narration about some intangible memories in this space. So Solby's gonna share it in the chat, the link. It's around 8 minutes. I'd ask you to watch it and then we'll come back. I'm really worried about sharing it from my screen because of the connection. But it's around 8 minutes. We can like come back in 10 minutes. Okay? The link's in the chat. Welcome back, everyone. So I think we have some time to actually hear from you if you'd like to share. I'll just say quickly that I like this documentary because I like short documentaries, so that's first primarily. But also I think he did an interesting job trying to combine between tangible and intangible memories together. But I'd love to hear from you. You could raise your hand and we'll take you in order. We have some time, so I think we can listen like directly from you instead from the chat. But if you want to type in the chat, that's also okay. Just your general impression, if you have any thoughts or comments about what you've watched. Yeah, go ahead.
I have something to say about the sound. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
you. I like the music, but when I heard the sound of the washing machine, I thought maybe because this is a foreign country to me, right? And to most of us, and the language is different, that might be nice to hear maybe something on the television that is the language of the country or something. Wouldn't it have been nice if we now know that live recordings of old people and their stories would really be beautiful, like live videos? So those were my thoughts, but I liked the pictures were very solemn and respectful, and I thought they were very good.
Thank you.
And I think your idea of short is good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there were some radio excerpts in the soundscape, but I guess it's a bit hard to make out all the like the sounds. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to say, in terms of the sound, I really loved the scene at the table where it was an empty table and you could hear the sound of the cutlery and the dishes. I felt like it really brought that scene to life, and like offered a story that, could bring in some of those intangible memories in a scene where we had to imagine that there were people there, or think about what this scene would have been like at a different moment in time.
Yeah. Thank you. I think in the chat, people are also commenting on the tone of voice for the narration. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. Yeah. Tim, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I loved how looking at the different small scenes and vignettes and details of the apartment made me think back to the different apartments that I've lived in, and thinking to myself, wow, what an accessible project that I could literally do to look in my room or in my apartment now and like walk around and just take these little clips and, put them together in a way that later on down the line I could look back. Because like I think about my old apartments and I can think of like, oh yeah, we, at this moment in time we had like the living room kind of set up like this, and what a weird bathroom situation that was in that one apartment. But like I can picture those, but how fun would it be to do that for here, or like where I'm living right now, as a snapshot of just like, this is what it was like here. And then it's also so wonderful that there were in the cinematography, there were no push-ins, there were no pull-outs. It was just all very still and very serene and very evocative of who lived there. So it's just like, oh wow, you get a sense of who somebody might be just by paying close attention. And I just really loved it. It made me feel like, oh dude, I want to go. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do it at my apartment. I'm going to hit up my friends. We're going to do it at their apartments. I was just like, yeah, I'm in love with it. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I think building on what you were saying, I think when I moved to Alexandria, I was living at my grandmother's house. And I think one thing I was thinking about with lots of our friends is how can we document a house, and like how can we really document life with our grandparents, and especially if they're not there anymore, or if they're, just the idea of like capturing all this. And I think what you were saying about it being like accessible or like relatable, I feel the same. I think the first time I watched it, I thought to myself, okay, that's a really cool way to try and document life and their grandparents' house, even though their grandparents might not be there anymore. But you can still like from the pictures, you can see the actual scenes or like the actual furniture and like different things. But from his tone of voice, maybe from the soundscape in general, you can get an understanding of how life was, what was like important to him in the spaces, right? What made it a bit more personal and like interesting for him, but also intimate, right? Like what made it intimate. OF, do you want to go? Sorry, I don't know your name.
Oh, that's okay. My name is Ofumilayo. It's just easy to abbreviate it there.
Okay.
Now, my first question is, have you made any films? Because I'd be really interested in seeing some films that you've made.
I have. I've just finished one short documentary earlier this year. About I take a walk around the neighborhood where I live in Alexandria, and I speak with my mom in the dialogue about our memories about this space. I'll send you a link. It's around 9 minutes, I think. I'll send you guys a link to watch.
No, that's wonderful. But I really did enjoy that film. It was refreshing, it was educational, was inspirational, and I really liked it. And I wasn't sure if that was something that you had made or someone else had made, And at first I was trying to link it up to the movie houses. You know, and that wasn't it. And then I finally realized, okay, she didn't make this film. But it was wonderful. And one thing about it is I think it's inspirational. And I agree with what Tim said. You see this film and you start thinking about, oh, I could do this, I could do that. And that's one of the really excellent things about that particular film. But I am interested in seeing your work too, and other people's work. I run a film festival. This is our 19th year, and it's a festival of shorts. So stuff like this, you know, I love because I get all kinds of things, all genres. And when I get something that I think is inspirational, everything just kind of lights up, and I want to see more. So please,
I'll share. We'll send an email at the end, like after the workshop with some reading resources and material as well. So I'll make sure we include that.
Yeah, but thank you so much for including that.
No worries. But just to clarify, I did not work on that movie. This is made by Mohammed Taimour. He's an Egyptian film producer and director. And the reason I chose his film, aside from why I like the actual film, but also because he's someone who's really interested in anthropology and also oral history. And so I feel like he usually incorporates a lot of that in his works, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And also I know that he's quite experimental. So he has different forms of work. And this was one of the short, clear ones that we can like talk about today. Tenzin, sorry if I mispronounce it, but you can go ahead.
Yes, it's Tenzin.
Perfect.
So something that caught my eye was the way I guess the camera lens, what they were focusing on, how it wasn't like an object wasn't in the center of the frame. They were in the left or right. Like for example, the vacuum cleaner was on the left, and the what was in the middle of the screen was the space between two furnitures. Or like there was a chair on the right in front of a wall, and then next to the wall is the open space to another room, but the end of that wall was in the center. So in other words, I noticed
particular shots.
So I noticed those kind of shots where it made me what I saw happening were the conversations between the objects, and therefore the conversation between the objects becoming the conversation between the object space and the family members or the grandmother or even the director. And then because of those kinds of particular shots, it gave me a sense of movement through the conversations with the environment. And so it gave me a sense of what life may have been like, and the interactions, just the choices of placing objects in certain places, like, you know, why they were there. So I felt that some of these scenes helped me to kind of get a sense of the sensorial experiences through the conversations between objects and the family members and the environment.
Thank you so much. Olda, you can go ahead. Sorry if I mispronounce the names.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I was fascinated by this film. I really liked it a lot. I like the fact that the tone of colors that he chose, it wasn't gray. It was a kind of color that brought back a sense of history as well. The choice of the almost the absence of bright colors, which was perfect. Obviously brought me back to my parents' home. But I am planning on doing it gave me ideas about what to do with my project, which is my grandmother. And I'm just wondering, when there are no objects available, perhaps if you could, before we finish, you could send us some links to when the objects are very minimal, but what you have is, I don't know, other voices to talk about a particular time period in history, and then how do we make it personal history? My grandmother was from the late 1800s to the beginning of, the middle of the 1900s. So it's a time period where, a lot was happening. I'm from the Caribbean as well. So I wanted to pick up also how difficult may have been for her to achieve what she did, but at the same time, make it very personal. I have very few objects of her. I finally got a picture of her. So I need to travel back to my country of birth, to be able to pick up some of these pieces. And this video gave me a lot of ideas about tone and about color and about the voice, how little he says, and yet how much of what he says is meaningful, because he says very little. But I like that a lot, so, and I'm looking forward to watching yours.
Thank you. Just a thought about what you were saying as well. I think the project that I'm trying to work on for my dad's uncle, I feel like oral history plays a really good role in capturing the intangible ones. And I was thinking about it, that also we always think about oral history with other people. So I started with a project thinking I want to interview my aunt, my mother, like people in the family. But then I also realized that maybe recording my own story is also important. So sometimes I think what you just said about how you see your grandmother and her life should also be taken into account, even if it's, as I said before, memory is quite interesting, right, in how it works. And we do understand that there are we can never be 100% sure of what we're saying about memory, even if it's our own memories. And I feel like this stops us from sharing things. Like, we're always worried that this might not be true. Maybe this is not exactly how it happened, but I feel like oral history gives us sometimes the space of thinking that if we're documenting a story from someone's perspective, then it is someone's perspective, and this is how they remember this. And it's okay if we're not sure if the memory is like true or not. And it's not about the truth of it. It's more about the meaning that we have about the memory and like how we're remembering it. And just saying that this is how I remember this story might just be as valuable. So in addition to, I feel like these projects could have like a lot of complementary tools, right? So obviously, if you can find objects, that would be great. If we can get other stories, that would be great. But if we already know a story ourselves, maybe it's also worth documenting. Do you know what I mean? Even if it's in our own voice, that's also has a value. Because I struggled a lot with this. Like, I just, I was like, I know my dad used to tell me these stories, but I kept looking for someone else to tell me the same stories. And then I thought, but I have these stories as well. But yeah, it's something to think about.
Thanks.
Thank you. You're welcome. Elizabeth, do you want to share something? I saw you unmuted. No, you're good. Okay. Okay, I'll look at the chat quickly because I saw like there are a lot of comments in the chat. So there are some people commenting on the sound design, the tone of the narration. He said that they got to know the grandmother a little bit from all that they've seen. Reading the text was interesting. Again, about this being like an accessible method. And how this relates to possibly other cultures as well. Making us think about our own grandparents. Very interesting. Very, very nice. Okay, I encourage you guys to read the chat because there are some very interesting thoughts there. I'm trying to share like anything that's different from what we've been discussing, but I apologize if I missed something. They're also saying how the film might have revealed spaces that the grandmother might have thought of, yeah, being personal or private. Yeah, this is a good point about, had the grandmother been alive while shooting this, would she have approved of how the house is being portrayed or not? And again, I don't know what Timur thought about when he was doing the film, but I know when we are doing oral history work, we always say there's also my view of the house as someone who might have like lived there or experienced that. And I feel like I'm not speaking on Timur's behalf. This is my own comment. I feel like so long as we know that the intention is not to show the house in a bad way, I feel like it works. I think my concern, like ethically, would always be if you're trying to showcase something that would be disturbing for the person. But I feel like it's very clear that his intention about showing the house is because he misses his grandmother and he's trying to, document whatever he can document. But also, I think there's something about choosing certain shots that show how the house might not have been cleaned recently, that it's not currently lived in, to show like the loss of his grandmother as well. So yeah, I think it's it's a very good point, but it's quite tricky, and I think it's something that we need to think about while we're portraying work like this for sure. Okay, thank you for everyone who shared personal stories in the chat as well. Okay, I think I've covered most of it. If I've missed something, I apologize. Okay, so I'll go back to sharing my screen. Thank you everyone for watching and for all your thoughts. So this was the film. Okay. So now for the first part, as I said, the first theme that we were talking about was generally family memories. And then the second part was a bit about archives and about thinking about what is a formal archive, what is an informal archive, or different forms of archives in general. And so when we talk about an archive, these are the definitions. There are a lot of the other definitions as well, but they're pretty much similar. So I just chose two to share with you. One is from the Cambridge Dictionary and the others from the Merriam-Webster. But basically, officially, an archive is a collection of historical records relating to a place, organization, or family, or it's a place where historical records are kept, a place where public records or historical materials are preserved, a repository or collection of information, and it could also be used as a verb. So archiving something is to file or to collect it as if in an archive. So the reason I'm using this is because I think the concept of an archive covers so many different layers. So for example, it's a collection of things. So usually call something an archive, it needs to have more than one thing, right? So it's a group of material or information or records. They say here historical records, which in my mind translates into, when we talk about archives that have to do with family collections, that maybe not historical in the sense of it being like something that tells, wait, I need to phrase this correctly. So in my mind, historical here means valuable, because I feel like when we are working with family collections, it's very, very difficult to say, is this a historical object or is this not a historical object if we're working with objects or documents or letters. But I feel the historical part of it is in its value, and because it tells us a history of some sort and tells us something about the story. So if we have a letter, for example, from my great-grandfather to his son telling him about his travels, then in my mind, this could work as a historical record. So I'm saying this because I think we lose a lot of material and documents because we don't think they're, official enough or historical enough. And I feel like with formal archives, within institutions and within different spaces, they have all these categories of like what kind of material to be archived there, depending on the theme, the purpose of the archive, and all that. But within family collections, when we work within our own family stories and family memories, I would say, I would recommend that anything that you think has a value, even if others don't understand why you think it's valuable, I would say it's important to archive or to preserve. The other thing I want to highlight in this is when they say it's a place. So I want to say it's a space because because I think again we really get stuck in not finding an official place to house the material that we have, when really all we need is some space. So this could be the location of what an archive could be like, especially within family collections, could be a drawer, right? Or a part of a closet, or it could be a box somewhere. So it doesn't have to be you know, a big building with archives. It could just be any form of space that can store this material. And this could be physical or digital, right? If you have like a folder on your computer with some pictures of your families, this could be the seed for some sort of a family archive. I also want to make like a disclaimer here. I think I have some friends who are librarians and archivists who might not be very happy with the way I'm use the word archive loosely. But again, for the purpose of this workshop, what I mean by archive is a space to store it and to preserve it. And for family collections, the more, in my experience, the more we complex what we need to have and do, it just stops us from doing it. And so it's much easier to simplify, to just think that we want to collect the material that we have, store them and preserve them somewhere, and be able to retrieve them again afterwards. Another concept is preserve, that in theory, when you archive your material, you want to make sure they're preserved. So they're in a space that would not, you know, ruin them or damage them in any way. Okay, sorry. I see there's a few questions in the chat. Would you be able to talk about historical significance when documenting family histories? I really think it's up to you to decide what's significant and what's not significant when you're working on your own family memories, history. I think, again, it's a bit challenging to say what's significant and what's not significant historically, right? Because people tend to think in very big terms. So, for example, if my grandfather went to, I don't know, he went to war and, you know, they won and he came back, then in my mind, this is historically significant. But if my grandfather was a very simple man, you know, who just like lived a very normal life, nothing like major happened, then I would say, okay, maybe this is not historically significant. Where I believe that's not true. I feel like any life lived is worth documenting, you know? Everyone has a story to tell and everyone has the right to be remembered. And so for me, it's hard to say what makes something historically significant. I really think if you think it's important and if you think it's valuable, in my mind, that would make it significant, if that makes sense. So there's a question about if it's recommended to digitize photos and letters rather than keep them in like acid-free envelopes. I don't think, wait, sorry. I think it's hard to say what's better than the other. I think in general, it's always good to have multiple options when you're archiving. If you can have both physical and digital, that would always be good. We can do our best trying to preserve the material that we're trying to preserve and like keep and store, but it's quite difficult sometimes. And I feel like digitizing something is not easy, right? It takes a lot of time, and to also file them and label them correctly and all that it's a lot of work. So you need to have the time and energy to do that. But I think in theory, having multiple forms of an archive would be wonderful. If you can have physical and digital, that would be great. Some people don't have the space to have any physical material. And so, for example, I have a friend doesn't like directly relate to your question about letters, but my friend was trying to also document something about her grandmother's house because they lived in a house. We have a renting law here that's like the second generation or third generation can't keep the house if the first generation isn't alive. And so they were supposed to give back her grandmother's house to the owners of the building. And she did again another short. Sorry, this section is a lot about like films and like short films. But she did a short documentary about the apartment with her aunt talking about who lived there, and why they had to leave, as a way of trying to capture this because she can't physically keep the house. And so I feel with letters and photos, it's different because it's not as hard finding storage space to keep letters and photos, but with bigger, if you have like your aunt's car that you want to keep, but you have to sell because you need the money. So there might be another way to try to document it without actually keeping the car if you can't. I'm speaking in very like general terms. I see someone shared a very interesting link to memory labs that offer equipment to digitize different forms of media, which is quite interesting. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Let's see what's next. Oh, okay. So talking about informal archives, we're basically trying to think also of alternative forms of archiving, right? And in my mind, a film like Taimur's kind of, in my head, works as an alternative form of archiving. So again, archiving is very, very big. Like what's it called? Like archival sciences is like a whole other field, right? But we're talking in very loose terms in terms of like documentation of something, keeping it preserved within our memories, being able to revisit it when we want to. It's always interesting and worth it to explore different forms of alternative archives, which could be by video, by sound. We'll talk a little bit about the sound after the break, like audio works as well. But also with like all the new like digital technologies, there are so many different options for us to capture certain memories that I think weren't available at the time before. And the easiness also of just using your phone to record someone's voice or really documenting something with the intention of documenting it has become, I think, much easier if you're aware of it and are interested in doing it. So yeah, we can take a break. Let's see, there's a question. Oh, no, yeah, we're good. Okay, so I think we kind of finished quite earlier than I expected. So we actually, before the break, we could have some time for people to share if they have any questions or comments. Sorry, I'm trying to get out of this. Let me. Yeah, C Diaz, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for sharing this film, and this conversation has been super inspiring. It just made me think, like, I am working on a family archive, both my paternal and maternal sides, and I just have I'm like the family archivist. I have so much stuff that I've been collecting and slowly digitizing. And one thing that keeps, like, this film that you shared earlier brought up to me, I feel like homes hold a lot of, memory, and that's kind of like an intangible thing because people move so much, and you have these memories tied to different homes you've lived in across, your lifetime. And it just made me remember this one video, and this is just a comment that I wanted to share that I found in my grandma's closet. That was a VHS tape, I guess either she or my grandfather recorded of a walkthrough of their home before they had sold the land and they demolished it to make a grocery store there. So the whole tape is basically a walkthrough through the whole house and each room. And I don't have the tape with me, but I just wrote a note down, like, go get the tape and go digitize it. So yeah, thank you for sharing. And this workshop has been great so far.
Thank you. Tim, do you want to go?
Yeah, so thinking about informal archives and like like they were just saying, like you have all this you have like all this information, you have all these files, you have all this documentation, but one thought is like it's better to have piles of things than to have no piles at all. And also thinking about like instead of looking at all of your piles of stuff as like, oh, that's so much work to do, but it's just like, oh, there's so much gold to be mined in this like information, in like these piles of things that I have. How much fun is that going to be? Sorry, random thought. But one thing that I have done or have started doing is so sometimes I'll do like collages, or I will write little notes to myself, stuff that like eventually would, for the most part, like it's just ephemera that comes through the process of making stuff and writing things, and it normally would have just been in the trash, but like I've been going through, and if there's any that like I have like interesting little doodles or whatever, like I'll kind of collect all this random ephemera, and then I just put it into kind of like sealed envelopes so that I can't get back to it, because I also know myself, I like never look back at stuff like that anyway. And I've just been sort of making this archive of all of this random stuff that just kind of popped into my life on like paper flat format. And then it made me think about what is the purpose of an archive. And in my mind, it's like, oh, how fun is it for me to think like later on in the future, I'll have all of these weird envelopes that anybody who would be interested in, whether that be children or grandchildren or friends or family, that could be like, oh, it feels like a little, I'm opening these little presents that have never been looked at since, 30, 40 years ago. So it's like the idea of having a sealed archive. I don't know, it just made me think of when you were saying what is an alternative archive, as well as what is the purpose of an archive. So if you had any thoughts on that, that'd be interesting, but thanks.
Thank you. Like on the point of the purpose of an archive, I think originally I got into it thinking that with my at least dad's uncle, it was mostly about trying to prove that he existed, right? I had this like very strong urge to do that because it was very weird that I couldn't find any information about him. But as I said earlier, I think with time and as I want to say maybe grew up a little bit more, I've tried to really understand the worth of documenting someone's life. For me, much more interesting because I can't meet him anymore, and it's like a puzzle for me. But I feel with people who are still living as well, who are able to talk to, if you spend enough time listening to their stories, everyone almost always has something interesting to say. And I think I was reading about why archives exist, and I think obviously one of them is like to preserve information, but in the space of family archives, at least, there was one article, it's in the resources that I'll share with you, but it was also talking about how the archive can be a very strong tool to make someone visible or invisible. So sometimes families would choose not to include someone in an archive or take them out from an archive, and then that's like their way of taking them out of the family history in the sense. And so I guess it's a more powerful tool than we understand. And just also just to say about what you were saying about having all these like pieces of paper together and like all your thoughts, I think scrapbooks in general make also very interesting memory objects. They tell you so much about the person, how they were thinking, the method that they use to document their thoughts. So that could also be like a very strong memory object. I think there was a question in the chat. Okay. Any ideas for creating a shared archive with your family? I actually don't know any shared repositories. I would probably just say like Google folder, shared Google folder. Sorry about that. But I think having a shared archive with the family is perfect because there's only so much that you can do on your own. And so having everyone else's input would be great. And I think, at least in my family, I feel like some of them hang on to the very strange things that I wouldn't expect them to have. And they only show them when we talk about something very specific, and they would say, "Oh, I still have this, or I still have that." And I think it's very, very important. If anyone has any suggestions for like shared repositories online for shared material for archiving, please share in the chat as well. I would be very interested to know if there are any suggestions. Okay, someone said ancestry.com has some family sharing capabilities. Great. Well, if no one else has anything to add or any questions, I think we can go for a break. Are we good? Can you give me a thumbs up if all's good? Yeah? Okay, cool. Okay, well, we'll have a break for 15 minutes. I can't tell you the time because my time zone is different, but like, yeah, we'll be back in 15 minutes. I have a timer on the screen as well. So see you guys in 15 minutes. If you can let me know if you're back either in the chat or doing any action on camera, I would appreciate it. Okay, cool. Wonderful. Thank you. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you had a nice break. Break time always flies for some reason. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about, I think, films and videos for the first part of the workshop so far. And so I'm very happy to talk a little bit about audio in this coming part. So I'm going to share two audio projects that I think are quite interesting. Let's see. Okay, great. So this is an audio recording that I think is really interesting. It's around 3 minutes. I'm going to try and play it from my side. If it doesn't work, please let me know in the chat and I'll send you the link and you can listen to it. It's kind of self-explanatory, so hopefully it's clear enough.
Good morning. Every year for the last 13 years, I've been presenting the story and sound of the growth of my niece. Well, this year I'm going to present it in an unusual manner. We've all heard of time-lapse photography. That is the type of photography where one can see within a few minutes the full process of growth of a flower, of an animal, of a home, of a building, and so forth. Well, I'm going to apply this technique to the growth of my niece, Nancy, in sound. And here, in 2 minutes and 13 seconds, without any interruption, you will hear Nancy's voice from the age of about 1 month all the way up to 13 years of age. That's 13 years condensed into 2 minutes and 13 seconds. Here goes.
Jack and Jill went up the hill
to fetch a pail of
water.
Jack fell down and broke
Down.
and Jill came tumbling
After. Happy birthday, Daddy. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. If you call the toy store up and you say I want a puppy and a whistle and a horn and a hat and a dress and a ballerina costume, that's what you get. But when Santa Claus can't bring you, you can't cry. Tony, if the dog makes wee-wee in the house, if you have to make him housebroken, if he makes a wee-wee in the apartment, you have to slap him with a newspaper. Then if he doesn't do it again, he's housebroken.
What do you think of the Russians sending the dog up in the satellite?
Well, I hope he doesn't get hurt. But if he does, I'm sure they'll send up a medical satellite. In school, we each had to do a report on someplace, and I'm doing a report on Hawaii, and we're taking notes and doing research. This summer we're going camping, and in the month of July this summer for the whole month of July this summer I'm going to go to Brownie Sleepaway Camp. It's all girls. You'll miss my hair, and it's very special for tonight. It's just the way I want it. It's in a pageboard with a high top, and that's the way I like it. I'm taking guitar lessons, and that's fun. I take drama lessons after school, and that's great. And I've been working on the school newspaper. I might be editor next year. And I've been discovering boys.
12 years and 2 minutes and 4 seconds. This is Tony Schwartz saying, see you next week.
So I'd definitely love to hear your thoughts about this. Solby, can we share the link in the chat as well? So we'll share the link with you guys if you want to revisit it at any point. I like this. It is a great idea. I really like, I'm saying it, I'm commenting on the chat. Yeah, so it's called Nancy Grows Up. And I think I really like it because it kind of sometimes shows how the production of some work might be so short, but you can only imagine the length of time and energy that was invested in just recording all this over so many years. Chrissy, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think kind of speaking of that, I feel like part of what's so moving about it is understanding that this was created from just such dedication from the recorder, this uncle to his niece. I think that's a really special part of the archive, and it's something I was thinking about actually with the film before the break as well, that it felt so much about I guess that a family archive is almost as much about our relationship to these characters as much as an objective view of who they are. So it's partially their true history, or true, whatever true is, but partially their history and partially really ourselves inherently kind of a piece of it, because we're talking so much about maybe the parts of ourselves that have been lost because we no longer are in active relationship with that person or that period of time with that person. And I think it's kind of an interesting element of a family archive versus an archive we don't have a direct connection with, is that we're sort of inherently a part of it ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you for this. I think also, I keep thinking of how sometimes when we feel something is really important and worth documenting, it's worth putting the effort to document it, even if we're not sure how it's going to come out in the end. I think that's also important. And I think of this audio as well, because I mean, I have these questions in my head of did he originally think about all this? It's hard to say I'm gonna document someone for record them for 13 years to do a time lapse. So I'm pretty sure there were other intentions as well with the recordings, but it's just nice to know sometimes you feel an urge to record something and you feel it's important, whether via photographs, writing down, whatever format you're comfortable with. And then maybe years after, you'll come to realize how this could come together and like how it could, you know, be produced or like be formed in the end. And I think one thing I facilitate a lot of oral history workshops, and we always say, it's okay if you don't know where this is going, and it's okay if you don't understand why you feel it's valuable. But if you feel this, if you have this push and urge to document something, go ahead and document it, and you'll eventually figure out what to do with it. But if you feel it's important, then there's something important about it. And it's okay if you don't fully understand what yet. Anyone else wants to share anything else?
Oh, yes. Oh, my camera is not turned on. I really love the idea of the audio time lapse, and I grew up in Normandy on the D-Day sites where the landing took place in 1944. It's going to be 80 years next year, next June, or this June, and I'm thinking an audio time lapse of what happened, including sounds of the celebrations and how they evolved, and ending on the quietness and peace of the beach. I think that would be something really meaningful.
I'm happy this makes you think of like how you can work around things. I think audio can be really powerful, and I don't think we always give it enough space. Video is really attractive and photos are very attractive. So I think we kind of naturally lean into that. But if we spend enough time with audio, I think we can create something very special. Megan?
Yeah, I really like what you said about how when you're embarking on a project, you don't necessarily need to know how it will turn out, and also kind of the freedom to edit stories and create something different with these stories, because a lot of the oral history workshops that I've been to, oh, hold on, let me turn off the kettle.
It's okay. We can't hear the sound until
oh, you can't hear the tea kettle. A lot of oral history workshops that I've been to, I feel like you're recording a truth. Okay, nobody believes there's objective truth, but you know, you have to get the verbatim story unedited into the archive. And I'm very troubled by that because I'm collecting family stories that are not my own family stories. But it's like a group project, a communal project of family stories. And I don't want to be an expert on these people's lives, and I don't want to archive their stories as if it's some word for word truth. And I like how you're inviting us to be creative in the ways that we can play with sound and take snippets here and there, because there isn't, you know, one objective way to tell a story. Thank you.
Anytime. Yes, I think so. When I had started doing oral history, as I said, like initially at the very beginning, it was kind of self-taught, right? I was just reading manuals, trying to do oral history work, and it was very, very challenging. Even though oral history could be quite simple in its approach, we didn't really know what we were doing, I think, in my group when we were students. But I think one of the pressures I felt all the time was this thing about truth and about portraying exactly what the person is saying, and feeling very pressured and stressed if I feel like I'm not exactly recording what they're trying to say in exactly the same way, especially if we're doing bilingual projects and we're doing like translations. But I think a big part of it was when I went to the oral history master's program, we were speaking about how, again, like just acknowledging that it will never be objective. It's always subjective because it's someone's story based on someone's memory, someone's upbringing, someone's, you know, background, knowledge, thought process, analysis, all of that. That takes so much away. And also, sometimes I'd be very keen on capturing someone's words in exactly the same way they said it. And then I'd share it with them later and they'd be like, I don't like this is not how I would say it. And I would be like, this is exactly how you said it. He's like, yeah, maybe I said it in, you know, in the middle of the discussion, but that's not necessarily how I would say it. which I think is quite interesting. And we do even ourselves, right? Like, I feel very self-conscious being recorded because I know when I listen to it later, I'll be like, how did I say that? So what I'm trying to say is I think it's completely okay. And it's kind of the strength of oral history is in its subjectivity, that you're trying to say these are all these different opinions, life stories of people from their own perspectives and experiences. And we're not trying to add this layer of it being objective. And I think like that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, it's also important to acknowledge our presence in the process. So I think with research, we always say, you know, try to be a fly on the wall. And I don't think that's possible at all within oral history. I have some concerns about it in other research methods as well, but like specifically with oral history, your presence affects the process even, you know, unintentionally. So I think here, for example, when you do an interview, well, I mean, all over the world actually, but you being a female or a male of a certain age group, of a certain background would already change the way the person is saying the story. There was a very interesting oral history project, I think it was in the UK, where children were interviewing people who used to be in the war, soldiers, like former soldiers, and listening to the audio recordings of how these soldiers were talking to the kids about their experience in the war is very interesting, right? Because they're basically telling them a very heavy story, but in a way that's kind of automatically tailored for kids, right? So it's not super gory, it's not super intense. You can tell it's a difficult story, but it's being said to a child. And I always think of that. So the story will always be different. If someone uses really bad language and sees that you look like a nice girl, maybe they won't say this, they won't use their own language, you know, they'll try to speak in a nicer way. Same thing for age, different things. So just your presence will affect the process. I don't think we should put too much effort into trying to make ourselves invisible in the process. And I think it's completely fine to say what you were saying about, you know, I'm trying to document someone else's family story. And so I will have an opinion about it. And I think someone was saying in the chat about the audio bites, what was chosen, what was edited out. And so we will always have this role. You'll always like lean into something because of your interest. And that's completely fine so long as you acknowledge it, so long as, you know, somewhere it is said that you played this role in this place. I feel like that's completely fine. I see there's some also stuff in the chat. Okay, cool. I don't think there are any questions. Anyone else wants to share anything? No, we're good. All good. All good. Thomas, do you want to say something? You look like you're deeply thinking about sharing something. Yeah? Okay, he's connecting to you. No, okay. There was a question about, yeah. So when I said like self-educate, I was trying to, because the professor, again, who was helping us do the oral history work when I was younger, did not practice history herself. So we went to different manuals. There are, I think now there are much, much more practical and interactive manuals than at the time. So that was back in 2007, 2008. I think all the access I had was to the university library. And so there were these manuals that had all these like different points on how to conduct a good interview, right? Things like you need to be a good listener. You need to not interrupt someone when they're talking. And these kind of things, when you read them, they make complete sense. But then you go in an interview and you're not a good listener and you're interrupting people. And you listen to the interview after and you're like, oh my God, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm doing it anyways. So how do I not do it? And then the manual doesn't tell you that, right? So I think that was the biggest challenge for me, that all these like different tips were very logical. So I completely agreed with them. I just didn't always know how to practice them. And I think the best lesson for me was definitely to practice and to do the work, but also to have someone you can go back to and ask, someone who's done this before and so can give you different options. I don't think with oral history, you ever really get like one solid answer on how to do something, but it's always nice to know the different options, and then you choose depending on the project, the person you're interviewing, the purpose of the interview and all that. And so I think it's really worth it. Like doing it yourself helps a lot, like going through the whole process, but also having someone who can guide you through the different options is really, really valuable. Okay, I think we can, I'll show you another, I think since you said you wanted to see some of my work, I can show you, I wasn't going to show you this, but I was thinking maybe now I can, since you guys are interested. So if you give me a second, this is a project I did when I was in the oral history master's program, and we were supposed to do a video. Well, not a video, we were supposed to do an oral history interview and then try to produce it or publish it in like a multimedia format. And so I did an online interview with an Egyptian friend. He was in Alexandria at the time. I was in New York. And so we recorded it online, but it was a story that I had known from before about his relationship with his grandfather. And I had always told him I want to record the story, but I don't know how to do it properly. So when I do my oral history master's, I'll come back and record it. And then when this assignment came up in the class, I thought of him and I wrote to him and I was like, I think I can record it now. And so I think the interview itself was around maybe an hour and a half, but then I did it in, I think it ended up being like a 6-minute video, but it's really audio. So the audio is in Arabic, but the video has English subtitles. Yeah, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. So I'll put it in the chat and you guys can watch it and we'll come back and talk about it. Welcome back. Okay, let me know your thoughts. Chrissy?
I was just struck by how powerful like the human voice is, like how different it is. You know, I don't speak or understand Arabic, but despite that, hearing the speaker's voice is just such a powerful part of the piece. And I was imagining how different it would be if I was simply reading the transcript, maybe alongside the photographs. I think there would still be texture, but just yeah, the importance of literally oral history and how much texture that brings to something like this.
Thank you. I think we talked about this a bit when we were developing it, about should we use his voice, should we not use his voice, should I do, because I think someone had suggested at one point that I do like a voiceover in English of his story, which felt very strange, you know, because it's so particular to him. He also has a very interesting way of saying it. The words that he uses in Arabic are quite, I don't know, in my head it relates so much to him that it would feel very strange for me to take over. But I think it was an interesting experiment in trying to create some sort of a video for sound. Because I think if we were in Egypt, you know, you could just put pictures in a space and like have the audio around, and you know, it would give you a different feeling, but having to work on it for a different audience who wouldn't understand his speech, and also this way makes it easier to share online and for it to be like more accessible, is also interesting, I think. So it was an interesting experiment. The point in the chat about his intro not being at the beginning, so at my first trial at the video was with his intro at the beginning, and it was very traditional, you know, like he would say who he is and then talk about his grandfather. And then I think when we shared it in class, everyone was like, we really don't know him, so we're not very interested about his like introduction of himself at the beginning, as opposed to after listening to the story, you kind of feel more familiar, or like more, you know, there's some sort of a connection with him. And then when he starts talking about himself, you really want to listen about him, which I think makes sense. I think I just started it in a very traditional approach and then tried to experiment with the order of the audio. Yeah, I liked adding his picture. I initially wanted to add his grandfather's picture, but he didn't send it to me. I asked him several times and he didn't. So yeah, that's what I had. Well, I'm glad you guys liked it. It's one of my favorite ones. I still think that his story can be documented in so many different ways, but I'm just happy to have this. I think it was also personally interesting for me to see how a really big story can be portrayed in just a few minutes, just a small part of it. Because as I said, the interview itself was much longer. There were so many other details, but sometimes when you're producing work, especially from long oral histories, it's nice to just zone into one idea that you want to communicate. And then that kind of explains everything else without having to add all the details, if that makes sense. Because people might not always be interested to listen to like a raw 1 hour and a half interview. Do you know what I mean? But they would listen to something much shorter that would give you the same idea. Thank you for all the comments. Okay, I'll show you one more thing. I don't think I have any other links for you guys to watch, so no worries there, because I feel like that was a lot today. This one, and Solbi is gonna also share the link in the chat, but this one's in Arabic. This is a podcast episode that a friend of mine had worked on about with the theme of like inheritance of family photos from the past and its impact on present day life. It's called Atyof, and Atyof in Arabic is a bit of a difficult word to translate. It's a little bit of, it has the meaning of like ghosts, but also spirits and shadows in a way. And I know there are some Arabic speakers here, so you might be interested to listen to the episode. But I think it's very special because Farida is my friend, and so we talked a lot during her process when she was working. And she originally, what happened was she found a photo album at her family house. I think it belonged to her grandmother, and she saw a lot of torn pictures. And so there would be like in the image on the right, completely torn pictures, and then in other parts there would be pictures with someone torn out of them. And so she started asking around in her family, and a lot of her family members were not very interested. You know, they were more like, yeah, you know, some pictures are not there, who cares? And she felt like she was the only one really interested about it. And then she did some oral history interviews with her dad and her sister. And then she had her mother help her with some voiceover in the episode, reading from different scripts. And she tried to make a story together of how she was trying to search for the meaning of why her grandmother would take out people from the photo album, but also kind of portraying the different feelings and ideas of her other family members about why she's looking into this and what this could mean and like how this could reflect on their relationship to the grandmother and her own relationship to her grandmother. The reason I'm sharing this here, even though it's in Arabic, is I think sometimes when we do things like this in terms of like, again, alternative forms of like documentation, it's really interesting how you can capture a moment in time and how people are thinking. And so basically people's thoughts and reactions in this moment of time. And then you're able to revisit it again, listening to the audio or watching the video. And I think that's a really big part of why I think this episode is really powerful. She did so many long oral history interviews over like, you know, several weeks. She did a lot of research. She talked to a lot of family members to try and figure this out. And then in 20 minutes, she kind of put it all together, adding in a script from different books. Also, I think the music was really interesting. And I think she, if I remember correctly, I think she did a follow-up episode afterwards with more reflections on that. But I wanted to introduce or like to talk also about podcasts in general as an interesting form of documentation. And I mean, obviously documentation of everything, not just family memories, but I do feel particularly for family memories that would be nice if someone, there are a lot of episodes out there that talk about family memories in different ways. So I feel like on the one hand, using audio, plain audio, because in this case, it's not like the video with Omar's story where there's a video and like subtitles, it's just audio. I think it's also very powerful. I know she's also working on having it in a video format with English subtitles, but it's not published yet, but hopefully it will be sometime soon. I think this is it for the part on like formal and informal archives. I have one last thing to share with you before we go into breakout rooms and you guys start sharing together about your own memories. I think many people in the chat have already touched a little bit upon this, but talking about how to archive family collections. So some of the readings we'll share after the workshop have some very interesting suggestions and recommendations on how you can go about archiving your collection, but I'll touch upon, I think, the main themes that I think are important. So when we say how to archive a collection, I think the first point is, how do we create or build a collection? And I think the very first step is to just sort out what you have. And that, you know, is very, very, in a very simple way, you just need to figure out, what do you have? Do you have, you know, 2 boxes in the basement? Or do you have, I don't know, a closet of clothes that belong to someone who you haven't checked yet? Or so what do you have? It's just nice to map what you have and then figure out its form or its type. So just making this division of, okay, I have pictures, I have letters, I have cassette tapes, I have, you know, books, stories, I don't know, whatever. So just figuring out what do you have is just the first step, and it's really, really important. And I remember there was an article that mentioned something like just putting everything in a box and saying, this is the box of letters, this is the box of pictures, this is the box of scarves, is, you know, the first step. And that would like take you a long way afterwards. Labeling it obviously is important, and label can be very, very basic, as I said, just to say, these are pictures, these are letters, or you can go more in depth if you have the time, or if the collection is not that large and you're able to handle this, or if you have people helping you out, you can go a little bit more in depth when you're labeling. So you can say, these are the letters from 1940s to the 1950s. These are the letters of this other time period. Or these are the letters from my grandmother. These are the ones from my father. These are the ones from my sister. Do you know what I mean? So you can start like sorting within the original sorting. You can stop there. There was one article that said you can just stop there and you're good. So you at least know what you have and you have it labeled. You can go further and start to filter what you have. So within all these letters or photos, are there duplicates? Are there ones that you don't need or don't want? Are there, do you know what I mean? So just like filter through them and have your own system of what you think is a priority, what you think is more important. Does something need preservation? I think some people talked about this a little bit. Do you need to store them in somewhere specific because you don't want to ruin them? And then the question of storage and archive. So what kind of storage do you need for the kind of material that you have? So there are different, one of the articles I'm sharing as well talks about different forms of preservation, but the idea is, for example, pictures could be stored differently than cassette tapes. The question of digitizing things always comes up. I lean towards having multiple forms. So if it's something that you can have physically and also digitize it, that would be perfect. I think having things in digital format helps a lot, and it makes it easier for you to be able to use them in the future. But I think there's something very special about the physicality of the objects, right? So if you have the space for it and you're able to do it, I think it's just as equally important to store it. But it's also important to have it like most of the things, you know, in a dry space that's not super humid, in a place that, you know, won't, you know, doesn't have a leakage or something, a place that you will visit or like see. I said before, this could be like a drawer or a closet in your room or a box, but I think it's important to label it very clearly, to know where it is and to be able to access it easily, right? Because I think one thing I used to do when I was younger was to do all this, like sort, label, and everything without really knowing this process, you know, but it would just be what I would do. And then I would put it like really high in the closet in my room at the very back. And then years later, I wouldn't even know what it is because the labels are inside and not outside. And so I would see a box and be like, this has something, no, not sure what it is. So you need to also make sure it's accessible and protected and preserved. I think the next step is, so you can stop at the first one of just building a collection, but it would be great, I think, if you're able to expand on it or make it grow. And that the first step is to just see what else you can add to the collection. And I think a lot of people have touched a little bit upon this earlier, but the idea of what kind of research can you do to give meaning to some of the objects that you have? If they're intangible things, if there are memories that are intangible, how can you record them and add them to the collection? Can you do oral histories? Can you, I think someone was saying like how their WhatsApp voice notes they think are really valuable because they say so much about what they're thinking. But whatever you really think is a way to just add to what you have. Some people start looking online for different material, depending on like what kind of collection you're building. But I think there's always room for expansion and growth if you want to. And then the kind of like by default, the next step would be producing a part of it or publishing a part of it, if that's possible. And the production part doesn't have to be public. It could also be like an internal part of the production, if that makes sense. So it could be something that's done, like if you do a booklet with a family tree with pictures, that could be just for the family, and that's completely fine. But the idea of having the archive not being completely static in the sense that things are just stored, but also having the space to have the archive become a bit more interactive, so that if people are not going to access it in the sense of coming and checking out the box, but they can also maybe learn about the material that's inside it. And it doesn't have to be you or the same person doing all these steps. I think it's a collective process at the end. And I think it's important to have more people involved with you because we all have very different perspectives on things. And it could be very rich to get all these perspectives together and think of how these kind of collections can develop. Yep, thank you. The CDS was saying archives need to be activated to keep them alive. Very true. We try our best, right? That's all we can do at this point. I think that's all I have mostly for today. I think we have around maybe 20 minutes to do breakout rooms. And these were the suggested discussion points that you guys can together. If we were a smaller group, we would have done it here, but I think we're a lot too many people to do this here. But basically you can together share a family memory that you like to preserve. If you've already come thinking of something specific, you can share that. If something else has come up during the conversation that made you think about it, you could also share it. Discuss if it's tangible, intangible, how would you record it, and why do you think it's important to you? We'll put these questions in the chat as well for you guys to have in the chat rooms. Any questions? No. How long are breakout rooms? I suggest 20 minutes. If you are in a breakout room and you feel like you're done with the discussion and it's all good, you can return to the main room. So there's no pressure about having to stay 20 minutes if there's not much to share. No pressure. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm very happy to hear from you. What happened in the breakout rooms? You're welcome to share thoughts in the chat, or you could also like use the raise hand button and we can share here. You can reflect about something that you've discussed, or if you want to share something about one of the questions that were asked about the type of family memory that, or like the form of family memory that you want to preserve or its importance to you. I'm happy to hear whatever you'd like to share.
I just wanted to briefly say that in our group, some things that came up were sort of obstacles to getting to the family histories we want to research. So maybe physical distance of country or an island being far away. Also, maybe, like 3 generations gone, but you want to go back and make sense of materials. And the last thing was like family feuds, where maybe someone has the information, but you don't have access to it. So I feel like there's some obstacles too that maybe need to be addressed or strategized before people can have access to this project.
I think family feuds are the most challenging ones, right? Because that's a bit different. It takes longer to fix. Did you think of, were you able to share any insights or suggestions of how you can address some of those challenges?
No, we ran out of time.
Okay, sorry to hear that. Well, if people have ideas, they can share in the chat as well, or tell us if they have any suggestions of problems. I know that for the long distance ones, online strategies have been working well so far. It's not the same like sitting with someone and recording with them, but even if it's over a phone call or on an online call, I think this works. There are ways around recording with someone that might not be the best option, but it is an option. And I think sometimes it's okay to resort to that until we're able to make a better way. There were some ideas, especially during COVID, I think when we started doing a lot of remote work, a lot of suggestions on how to, for example, if you want to interview someone who's much older and living really far away, and so they wouldn't be able to handle like, logging into Zoom or like all these things. And I think some of the suggestions that were shared were possibly having someone go to their home and record for you, even if it's using their phone. So there are a lot of online resources, especially during COVID, that spoke about how you can handle different ways of addressing like remote interviewing, specifically for oral history. But I think most of these techniques would work when you're doing also family histories. That's one thing I thought of when you were saying like distance. I think the harder question, especially when you said family feuds, is the one where people are not interested or are not willing to be interviewed or share information. And that's quite tough. And it's very case specific. So I don't think there's like one solution, but yeah, it just needs a lot of time, I think, and possibly help from other family members as well, if that's possible. Elizabeth said they talked about sharing the work with other family members. That's really nice. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, how did you think of forms of how to share it?
Well, it kind of came up in multiple ways. One was about when you have a large project, like a lot of archival material, and that the importance of having multiple people give input so that it doesn't become a one-person project through one lens, so that it expands it. So that was one area. And then one instance where the idea came up of sharing the work. And then for myself, sometimes I might be an obstacle to myself, like my preconceived idea of how exacting it has to be to meet certain standards, when the important thing might be just get the recording. And so, those were some of the things I took away today, was looking at these short videos or audio recordings and things and how powerful they can be. And it doesn't have to be a bigger endeavor. So I saw that theme coming up in a few of the different comments.
Yeah, I think also it would be great to do something like super big and, you know, that meets all your standards. It just needs more time. And I think, like you said, it's sometimes so big that it stops us from doing the work. And so I think if you're able to break it down into smaller, like achievable things, and then maybe with time, if you have more, you know, multiple like material, then you're able to develop it and make it much stronger. That would always be great. Do you know what I mean? But I think I was stuck in the same thing. I think the project about my dad's uncle was very heavy on me because, you know, my grandmother had passed away, my dad had passed away, and like going through all the material was really difficult. And I always thought I have to do like this huge thing to give justice to, like, you know, all their memories. But I ended up not doing anything for like 10 years just because I keep feeling this pressure. And then at some point when I let it go and I was like, you know, I'll do what I can with my capacity, and maybe that's better than not doing anything. And I think we say this, but then we end up doing like some really good work because it's something that's coming really from, you know, a genuine interest. And so you wouldn't be okay like producing it in a way that you don't accept. So maybe it's not exactly as you want, but I promise you it would be something that you like. I think one challenge that also comes with like working with family histories is how different family members have different views of things. So sometimes you'd interview, for example, the mother, and she would say something, and then the daughter would be like, no, I don't like my mom saying this. This makes her look bad, or do you know what I mean? But then the mother herself is okay with it. And so I feel like with these things, it's a bit difficult because they're all members of the same family. And so you can't tell someone like you don't have a say in what the other person says. But also, I think we've had some issues with this, especially with works where you've interviewed someone and then, for example, they've passed away and then their children are not okay with what they've said. And it's hard, like handling, like navigating these questions sometimes. Sorry, I'm gonna try and look at the chat. I think there are a few, for the question about PhD programs, I think I know one about oral history and archives. I'm gonna have to look it up. I'll share my email at the end before we leave. So email me again and I'll be happy to email you back. Or like write it in the feedback form and I'll send it to you. Like I just have to look it up. Thanks for sharing, OHA New Zealand. Diane said, ask family members to write biographies for themselves, write stories they remember of their older family members, make a book. That's very nice. These are all very nice suggestions. Video and sound change format. Backing up is so important. Thank you for mentioning this. Make sure you have, if it's digitized, make sure you have multiple copies, and don't make the mistake I did of having the multiple copies like being 3 folders on the same laptop, because when the laptop dies, they disappear. So make sure the rule is always 3 copies in 3 different places, right? So if one is online, then one is on a laptop and one is on an external drive or on a flash. Do you know what I mean? But I used to do this. I would do multiple copies, but all on the same computer. And then if the computer crashes, I lose it all. And in my head, it's like, but I've made copies. So please don't do that. Okay, great. So I think we have some time for questions if you want. I'll share the screen quickly so you guys can have my email. Feel free to write me at any time if you have questions, thoughts, reflections, suggestions. If you've worked on something and you want to share it, I'd be very, very happy to read, watch, listen to whatever you share. And yeah, we have some time for questions. If you guys have any questions or want to share any reflections, I'd be happy to hear them. And also, Solby is going to share in the chat a link to the feedback form. I'd be very, very thankful and grateful if you guys fill it out. It shouldn't take so much time, but it just gives me an idea of what worked today, what you'd like to see more of. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned you were working with Palestinian refugees when you were just getting started. Have you seen any powerful projects with Palestinian memories?
Yeah, there are a lot. I have a whole list. If you email me, I'll be happy to share it with you. I compiled like a list in my last oral history workshop about Palestine. There are a few very, very like good, rich online repositories for oral histories with Palestinians. One is with the American University in Beirut. And there are, yeah, maybe 2 or 3 like really, really big scale projects that I'd be happy to share for sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Oilda? How do you say your name? Can you tell me? You're muted, I can't hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You pronounced it perfectly.
Okay, great.
I know that we've talked a lot about archiving and for posterity and leave, and some parts may be shared with the family and some other parts may be public. What are your thoughts, or what is the process for when we talk about posterity? I'd like to make sure that posterity means that there has to be some form or some way that upon my death that it's decided who can share what or who can access to what. Is there can you share a little bit about that? Because posterity for me means, given my age, that I want to make sure that whatever I put together, that I decide who can share and who can't and how, in what form.
Yeah, so I think it depends a little bit on where you think you'll be storing the material. But for example, in formal archives or institutional archives, when you deposit any material, even if it's like audio recordings for oral histories or anything of that sort, you usually, the consent form or the release form that they have usually asks you a few questions, and it says things like, first of all, do you want this material to be accessed publicly like right away or after a few years? Sometimes they give you an option to close the material and to only be opened after a few years, or, you can, so there are different things. So depending on the type of archive, some of them would say this. So they would say, do you want this to be accessible right away or after 2 years or after 5 years, something like that. Other archives would be, you would say that you want to archive it, but for anyone to have access, they have to do these things. So for example, I know some archives had the stipulation that you would have to send an email and the person or someone from their family would have to approve your request to view the material. So the material is there, but it's not accessible to anyone. So they need to make sure that you, for example, are a researcher or that you are using it for something that fits the purpose of the material that's being recorded. So this is in like formal institutions. I'm not sure in informal ones how we can handle this, but I would say if you leave it to the care, in the care of someone or a group of people from the family, that you could still stipulate these things. You could do like, if it's not like a formal release form or, agreement, it could be something where you say, these are like the 3 purposes of this material. This is who I think should access it. And I would recommend to do this with more than one person. Just 2 or 3 people together as a group. It's just easier to manage, and because people get caught up in their lives, they kind of tend to forget all these things. So it's nice to have more than one person maybe oversee this. If it's depending on the type of collection, it might be worth exploring an official space to store it, if you feel this could be an option. And then they would have like a whole system and staff to work on that. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Sure. Hind, do you wanna share?
Yes, it's as if it's part two of the question. What if what you said actually happened and there is no agreement on a certain person or a certain topic in the family, and some of them don't mind you putting it out there, and others feel that this is something that shouldn't be available for everyone. Quote unquote censorship. What's the standard with dealing with something like that? Is there
It's very tricky. It's I would say it's a case by case thing. For oral histories, I would say the people, so almost everything in oral history is a case by case issue, unfortunately, but also kind of fortunately. But so for example, if you are directly interviewing the person, let's say you're interviewing the grandmother, and she's saying something that's very relevant to what you're recording for the purpose of the project, or for the purpose of this interview, she's completely okay sharing it. And then one of the sons says he doesn't feel comfortable about her saying this about herself, but it has nothing really to do with him, and she is like in complete capacity of agreeing and disagreeing. Do you know what I mean? So she knows what she's saying and she's okay with it. Then I would lean towards moving forward with it. If it's a part of the interview where she says something about her son and that's why he doesn't want it to be shared, I would, to be honest, I lean towards making people comfortable. And so if this is a part of an interview, if this part of the conversation is not directly relevant to what the project is addressing, then why not just skip it, and make him like sleep better at night and not be uncomfortable. If it directly relates to the project, then it's really very dependent on like how sensitive it is. I would say it's worth a conversation with the person herself, telling her that he's uncomfortable. How about we remove this? Can we get this story from someone else without involving this person who's uncomfortable about it or disagreeing? So I feel like it's very different. It depends on the sensitivity of the topic, how important or unimportant it is. But even if it's important, you should still try and work it out, because at the end, from the oral history perspective, you're documenting someone's story. So it's very strange to document someone's story without them approving of it. But that's why I said the first thing, that if it's a story about her that she's okay with, I don't think he has much of a say in it. That's very generic, right? I don't know the details. I know, for example, there was one article that we read when I was in the program. It's called That's Not What I Said, if I remember correctly. And there are two articles. So there's one article that a lady was interviewing her grandmother. It's much deeper than this, right? I'm sorry, I'm just saying it very briefly. But she interviewed her grandmother, and she was writing a book about her, and she saw her grandmother as a feminist, and her grandmother didn't approve of this and kept telling her, I don't see myself as a feminist, don't try that. But then she said she saw that this book was also a part of her own story as the granddaughter. And so her view of her grandmother being a feminist is something to be taken into account, right? And so she published the book, and her grandmother didn't approve of it. And then I think 25 years after, she wrote another article revisiting this decision and saying that maybe what she should have done at the time was not think that it's her story, but to maybe try and understand why her grandmother doesn't see herself as a feminist and what is her understanding of feminism. Because in her opinion, she's saying something positive about her grandmother, but her grandmother was being offended somehow. And so I feel like these kind of questions are important. Do you know what I mean? If at the end of the day, do you understand why he doesn't, why he disagrees to be involved in the story? Some of the interviews we do, someone would say, I don't know, something really bad about a relative, right? And he would say like, oh, he's so lazy, he doesn't do this, his work, or like he's a hustler. And then I think if that person says, oh, I don't want this part in the interview, I would understand, right? So I would say things that make sense and logic, you would probably know if you need to include them or not. It's the things that don't make sense where you really need to dig a bit deeper and to try and understand why doesn't that person want this part to be included. And I feel like when you have all this information, at some point you'll have to make a decision as the person who's doing the interview. If you're able to do it in collaboration with them, that would be great. That would actually be like the recommendation, but it's not always accessible and easy.
Yeah. So in other words, you do have the upper hand in the end.
I don't think it's the upper hand. I think you do
The final
some
decision.
choices. You do some choices as a researcher. To be honest, I tend to be a bit more collaborative with the people I interview. If they have the time and interest, because not everyone is interested in making these decisions with you, I would go back and check with them and try to find the decision together. I don't think I've ever, so far, I don't think I've ever made the decision on my own in something that was problematic like this. I would make sure that all parties are comfortable, because you never know how these information can be used in the future. So it's a big risk, you know, and I don't think I have that much faith in my powers to be like insistent of making someone look bad, because I think it's important for the research. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So when you're doing oral histories for more formal archives, there's a very specific set of processes depending on the institution and the what the goals of the project are. And I was just thinking about how much time and effort and labor goes into doing the transcript. And I was curious on if you had any thoughts on when to do transcriptions and when not to do transcriptions, especially for informal archives like family histories.
I think, so I came from a school that was a school of thought that believed transcription is like the key to life. And it was super exhausting, you know, it's such hard work. And it made me stop doing interviews because I would be like, I can't transcribe all this. And then I did my program, the oral history one, and then they were telling us how it's not, you don't always need to transcribe. And that was like magic. So there's so much value in transcription because you listen to every single word, especially if you're the one transcribing. So you listen to every single word, you notice like the pauses, you notice what the interruptions that were made, you see how you were as an interviewer. So it's really, really valuable, but it's so time consuming. So it's important to figure out what kind of work you need to do with the research or the recording that you have, and then decide if you need to do transcription or not. So, for example, with the video I did with, for the audio project I did with Omar and about his grandfather, I didn't do a transcription. I listened to the recording a few times and just started cutting out the pieces that I want. There's, we say there are a few formats of, I don't know the word in English, but basically like, okay, I'm gonna try and explain, but like how to make sense of a recorded interview. So we say the first option is you could do a summary of the interview, right? And this would just have like the main themes that were discussed, some of the points that you think are really important for you to remember that were mentioned here. And this could be like half a page or a page. You would still need to listen to the recording, but you would just write a summary. The second option is to do an index, which is my favorite. And so you do like an indexing sheet, which is basically like a table, and then you listen to the audio and you say, for example, from the beginning to like the first 50 or like 40 seconds, you write next to it general introductions. From, minute 20 to a minute 50, he talks about his wife. So it's basically like that. It's as if you're doing a content like sheet. And this is really good because later on, if you need to go back and transcribe, you can go back to the section that you want to transcribe and work from it. It was also helpful for me because while doing the indexing, I would choose the sections that I think could be good audio excerpts, and I would write next to it, this would be like, this has like a really powerful statement, I can use this. So I would say summary, indexing, and then transcription. And depending really on the purpose of the project, if you're doing content analysis, and you need to know the words that were used, and then you definitely need the full transcription. But I would also recommend, if you're working on the project, if they're big projects, you're always a part of a bigger team. And so you would have a team of transcribers, you would have a team of interviewers. It's really difficult for you to be everything, for you to do the interview, to transcribe it, to do the analysis. But sometimes you do, and that's fine. Just make sure you have enough time to do this without being rushed, and to really give it its time, you know, and not feel pressured to finish everything quickly, because I think that takes away from the quality of the work. There are programs, someone said in the chat, sorry, I think I've missed a few of the chat comments, but there are programs that transcribe, like Otter. I haven't used any of the online transcription services, mostly because I work with Arabic oral history interviews, and I don't think many of the programs still have Arabic in them. But I do have friends who've used them for English and said, you always have to do a revision, but it definitely saves a lot of time. I personally think I enjoy transcribing when I have time and I'm not rushed, because it makes me listen to every single word. So I'm not sure if I already get the transcription and recheck it, if that's going to be the same or not, but it depends on the project that you're working on. But I've had a lot of friends use them and they're happy. And it definitely, instead of working 4 days on a transcription, you'd need half a day to check it, and that would be much easier and faster for sure. Any other thoughts or questions? We're good. Perfect. Thank you everyone for being here today and for sticking out to the very end. Please feel free to write me at any point. I encourage you to fill out the feedback form, and I want to say a shout out to my friend Alexandra Ucciarelli. I wrote her asking how to pronounce her name properly because she's the one who provided most of the readings. She's a friend who's an archivist and a librarian, and I think she's a wonderful resource in and of herself. Thank you again, and good luck with your projects.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.